Ben, good morning. Excuse me my bad English. Welcome to this house that for a few days will also we yours. Es decir, bienvenidos a esta casa que durante unos pocos días también será vuestra casa. Moitas grazas a todos e a todas por estardes hoxe aquí. Eu son dos que penso, soy de los que pienso que mejor es que hablen las personas que saben, y yo me limito a presentaros a las personas que saben hablar y saben de lo que hablan. Entonces yo voy a dar as grazas aquí a Ildefonso de la Campa, que é o director da Sociedade Anónima de Xestión do Plan Xacobeo, a José Antonio, que é o técnico de Cultura do Concello de Ovicedo, a Mar de Santiago, que organiza isto, e, como non, a ULE, e a todas as persoas que estades aquí hoxe. Por lo tanto, o mellor que podo facer é que pasen a falar esas persoas que eu vos menciono. Moitísimas grazas e que o pasemos todas e todos ben. Grazas.
I think I take it in English, not in Norwegian, but they're all. It is an honor to be invited here to Galicia and to Katoira. As the chair of the Destination Viking, I really appreciate your warmness, your great welcome, your great seminar, and for hosting this arrangement for us. And as I said at the annual general meeting, don't be afraid. We are here. We are coming in peace. We are coming as friends, not as and I think it's understandable why our forefathers came to this part of Spain. It is a landscape that reminds us of Scandinavia. It's really green. It's hilly. It has the fjords, but the temperature is a bit different. It is to the program that you have been making for us. It's really interesting with this scientific seminar, with also the emphasis on tourism, and we are going to hear about it, and we're going to see it in our excursions. So I think this is really something that we will take back to our own countries, to our own municipalities, and to our own organizations. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you, Major Zoran. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you to Monica for the great job you have done. And thank you also to the Councilman Raul Gomez for your participation and your dedication for the Destination Viking. Thank you also for the director of Turismo de Galicia for joining us here, and hopefully you also see the great opportunities we can when standing together as an organization. And as we also have heard and seen at the members meeting today, I think we have a great future as an organization. So I think this is one of the good steps ahead, this meeting here in Katoira. We are an organization with many members, and we have members with a lot of engagement in the organization. And I think we really, with the things we have discussed at the members meeting, I think the future is quite bright. And let us together do the organization strong and make it that it will grow up better than we have today. So thank you again. Thank you very much for arranging this for us. I have a small gift. It's a leaflet from about the Vikings in Norway, or two. It's about the Viking route in our part of Norway, the Rogaland municipality. It was made before we were part of the Viking route, but now the country municipality is working on a new one with the right logos and everything. So that's really, really good to hear. It's also a book about the prehistory of my county. So I think that will give an impression of some of the Viking world, some of the Norwegian Viking world, and I think we just sharing knowledge, just meeting each other. I think this is great. So thank you.
Dear Mayor of Katoira, dear President of Association Destin Viking, I'm Ildefonso de la Campa, Public Manager of the St. James Way here in our community of Galicia and President of the European Federation of St. James Way, that is another operator of this itinerary culturals of the Council of Europe. As you can hear me this afternoon in my conference, I just only want to transmit the greetings of the Galician government to all of members of this association. And as President of the European Federation, I think it's important to maintain an open relation between these cultural itineraries, and especially about this because we have the same period to develop the beginning of the St. James Way and the presence of the Vikings here in Europe, and especially here in Galicia. I hope it will be a very good time here in Katoira, and we hope to have a very good work and a very good conclusions about this meeting. Thank you very much to everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow enthusiasm of the Viking world, it is with pleasure that I extend to you all a warm welcome to this seminar on the Viking Age. The Vikings, with their indomitable spirit, have long captured the imagination of people worldwide. From their epic trips across the seas, the legacy of the Vikings continues to resonate with us today. We are proud to belong part of their mysteries, of their renowned expeditions, of their far-reaching influence and their interactions with us, the neighboring civilizations. Moreover, this gathering will serve, I hope, as a platform for exchanging ideas. It is an opportunity for us to engage in share our expertise and gain new perspectives on this fascinating era of history. Let us honor the legacy of the Vikings by approaching our minds with curiosity, respect, and a commitment to understanding. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your participation in this extraordinary journey. Your presence enriches our country and contributes to the vibrant history of knowledge that we seek to unravel. May this seminar be a rewarding and enlightening experience for us all. Thank you, and once again, welcome to the captivating world of the Catoira's Vikings. Now, let me introduce you Diego Piay, a distinguished professor at the University of Oviedo and an archaeologist. With a passion for unraveling the mysteries of the past, Diego has dedicated his career to excavating ancient sites and interpreting the remains of different civilizations in Torres de Oeste. Through his research and teaching, Diego inspires curiosity and fosters a deeper understanding of our rich history. Welcome, Diego, to this seminar.
Good morning. First of all, I wanted to thank the Council of Catoira, his mayor, Joan Castaño, and Delegate for Culture, Raúl Gómez, for the opportunity they have given me to speak today in Catoira. I also welcome colleagues from Follow the Vikings and congratulate them on their project. Today, I will talk about archaeology in Catoira, from prehistoric times to the medieval period. Although it should be noted that I am a professor of ancient history and an archaeologist specializing in Roman times, despite this, I have excavated sites of different chronologies, especially in Galicia, acquiring a certain expertise in the Iron Age. I have not been fortunate enough to excavate at Torres de Oeste, but I have excavated at the site of a capella, which is just over a kilometer away from the Torres de Oeste. On the other hand, I have published, together with the archaeologist Juan Naveiro, a book on the ancient age in Catoira. So I have been able to study the archaeological evidence of this place. Juan Naveiro excavated at Torres de Oeste in 1989, and he is, in my opinion, the person who best knows this very interesting site. Torres de Oeste is a very important page from a Galician history book, and two from an Iberian Peninsula history book. In the book, A Pegada Romana in Catoira, we have analyzed all the available bibliography, the cartography, the archaeological documentation, the photographs, and the prints, modern and old, referring to this site. Thus, we have been able to write an illustrated and updated work on the history of Catoira in Roman times. The evidence refers mainly to the Torres de Oeste site, although the Capella site has also provided information of great interest for the past of Catoira, and has therefore also been analyzed in our book. The archaeology of Catoira. After reviewing the available documentation on the archaeological work carried out in Catoira, it is clear that Torres de Oeste is the site that attracts all the attention. Of the 9 archaeological interventions indicated in this table, 9 have taken place at Torres de Oeste. The remaining action took place in a capella in year 2023. At present, the CSIC is also carrying out non-intrusive techniques at the Torres de Oeste site, which include field walking, aerial photography, topography, and geophysical surveys. The aim is to improve the planimetric and photographic documentation of the site, to analyze its archaeological potential and the most appropriate areas for new archaeological interventions. As is usually the case with older interventions, the existing documentation is very scarce. Of the 1955 and 1973 excavations, we only have some very brief descriptions of the excavations and several photographs. Thanks to the writing of the book of the Roman times in Catoira, we were able to gain access to documentation of the 1970 and 1973 excavations, and to unpublished photographs and plans kept by members of the team of Alberto Balili Lana, the director of those excavations. The interventions of the years 1970 and 1973 were fundamental, since for the first time remains of Iron Age structures were located in the settlement of the Torres de Oeste. These structures were documented and analyzed at a wall during the excavations directed by Juan Naveiro in 1989. In the last intervention carried out in Torres de Oeste, which took place in 2011 and was directed by Francisco Herbés, new evidence from the Iron Age was documented. Unfortunately, the works associated with the medieval constructions almost completely destroys the structures of the previous occupations. In fact, virtually no Roman or Iron Age buildings remain. What are preserved are material remains, mainly pottery. Despite this, it cannot be ruled out that the structures may be located in other areas of this site in future excavations. We can see the excavated areas in Torres de Oeste. A general plan of the structures preserved as Torres de Oeste and the areas excavated to date shows that there is still a very large area of the site to be excavated, especially between the Lugo Tower and the inner fortress. When talking about Torres de Oeste and Catoira, it is necessary to talk about the river Ulla. The presence of this river course and its narrowing in the area of Torres de Oeste explains the prolonged occupation of this enclave over time. The fundamental reason that explains the importance of this river is that it was a natural route of penetration towards the heart of Galicia from the ocean. This explains, on the other hand, the existence of a large number of archaeological sites in the Arosa estuary and on both banks of the river Ulla. In all of them, evidence of prehistoric occupation has been detected, and in all of them, life continued after the conquest of the territory by Rome. The discovery of a Roman shipwreck in the waters around the island de Cortegada is also worth mentioning, which is very important evidence of the use of the river Ulla as a trade route in Roman times. But beyond the archaeological remains that have been documented in each of these settlements, the enormous importance of the river Ulla should be stressed, as it constitutes on its own an archaeological site of incalculable value. The remains that have been recovered from its waters reflect its function as a trade route extending the maritime traffic routes to inland areas from the late Bronze Age to the modern period, offering a repertoire of fundamental materials to understand the evolution of trade flows in this territory throughout history. From the waters of the Ulla come swords, spearheads, and bronze eggs from 12,000 before Christ, at a time when the river Ulla was a symbolic space. Remains of Punic vessels that circulate along the river Ulla in the 2nd century before Christ saw that the river was a trade route. Roman amphora, lucernas, and luxury pottery from the 1st century after death to the 5th century after death saw that the river Ulla was an area of maritime traffic. In the 9th century, it became a route of penetrations towards the interior of Galicia, a factor that explains the attacks by Vikings and Almoravids. And finally, to legend, the river Ulla was also the place through which the boat carrying the body of the Apostle St. James from Palestine passed, giving rise to the beginning of the Jacobean tradition from the 9th century onwards. We could add that, in our time, thanks to Mar de Santiago, the river Ulla is once again a pilgrimage route, as well as a space for the dynamization of tourism. Melania Payán Pérez will talk about this in this afternoon's conference. Prehistoric evidence in the Iron Age. The oldest evidence found as the Torres de Oeste archaeological site dates back to the 2nd century before Christ and relates to an Iron Age site with a strong commercial vocation. The characteristics of this primitive settlement are little known because the works carried out during the Middle Ages in this place profoundly altered the trace of the previous occupations, so much so that during the archaeological interventions carried out in 1989, removals were detected that even affect the rocky substratum. The factor alone explains why it's so difficult to discover human occupation prior to the Middle Age. To this must be added the confirmed reuse of stone materials in the new building, which required an enormous quantity of raw materials for its construction. It should also be noted, as can be seen in the illustration, that the topographical configuration of this site has changed over time. At least until medieval times, the site was located off an islet, surrounded by water on all sides. Today, the site is connected to the mainland on the eastern side. This implies that, at least from Roman times, communication with the mainland was via a bridge, of which some evidence was found during the interventions directed by Juan Naveiro in 1989. From the Iron Age settlement, only the remains of 3 stone structures with a predominantly curved line have been documented during excavation in 1970, 1973, and 1989, and in 2011. There must also have been wooden structures. Everything seems to indicate that the first settlement was built taking advantage of the existing relief condition. The first documented habitat at Torres de Oeste must have been built on a series of granite batholiths still visible on the rocky promontory, to which the constructions had to adapt. The choice of location is to be sought in the advantage offered by the proximity of the river Ulla, which has been a maritime route linking the ocean with the interior of the territory since ancient times. The chosen location made it possible to control any type of commercial flow along the river, since in this area the Ulla was significantly narrower than the rest of its course. On the other hand, the rocky promontory was in itself a natural defense, which was probably reinforced by the construction of wall structures or even moats that delimited the eastern part of the settlement and protect it from possible approach from the mainland. In any case, this first settlement does not correspond to a fortified settlement, whose subsistence was based on the exploitation of agriculture and livestock, nor on fishing, mining, or metallurgical resources. The very location of the settlement and the quantity of amphora remains related to it led to the conclusion that it was a habitat dedicated to trade. Although, as has been said, the archaeological structures are not abundant, material remains were found. We reproduce globular pottery shapes and decorations typical of the pre-Roman population of Galicia and of the so-called Castresa culture. During the archaeological work, an amphibolite egg was also found, which is now on display at the Centro de Activación de Torres de Oeste, CACTO. Roman times. To date, no structures that can be clearly dated to the Roman period have been found at the Torres de Oeste site. The explanation is repeated once again. The destruction caused by the construction of the medieval fortifications and the reuse of stone must have seriously affected the earlier structures. The Roman presence in this geographical area has been recorded since 138 before Christ, when the troops of General Decimus Junius Brutus reached the river Minho. Later, Crassus and Caius Julius Caesar would travel along the Galician coast in search of the mineral resource of the Hispanic Northwest. The definitive annexation of the territory took place after the Asturian-Cantabrian Wars in 19 before Christ. It's precisely with the end of the Roman conquest of the Northwest that the presence of a tower erected in honor of Augustus is related, as recalled by the Cadiz geographer Pomponio Mela. For this tower, the existence of which has been much discussed. Various locations have been proposed, including the site of the Torres de Oeste. However, today there is no definitive evidence to date that would allow it to be located here, although the divide is still open. As for the Torres de Oeste site, its occupation continued after the Roman conquest. This is confirmed by the remains of common and luxury pottery, in addition to the abundant amphorae remains. These materials confirm activity at the site up to the 5th century. Another element that bears witness to the Roman settlement are the inscriptions in Latin. Curiously enough, they were found in the collapsed medieval structures, but in any case, they testify to the existence of a Roman occupation prior to the construction of the medieval fortifications. Given the absence of remains of constructive structures from the Roman period, it is necessary to reflect on the usefulness of the settlement from the 1st century after death onwards. The large quantity of amphora remains, up to 4 different typologies have been documented, and import materials allow us to defend the continuation of the utility defined for the preceding period and the presence of an enclave of a port nature on a wharf in which navigation to Iria Flavia and the flow of goods was controlled. This interpretation is undoubtedly the most reasonable if we consider the data known from the site and argues for a certain continuity with the previous period. The discovery of a large quantity of amphora remains in the depths of the Ulla, recovered in the western and northern areas of the settlement, reflect a strong commercial activity, which undoubtedly required the existence of suitable structures to facilitate the rapid unloading of goods and mooring of vessels. All of this allows us to interpret the settlement as a small Roman port. Already mentioned, the pottery remains point to the abandonment of the Torres de Oeste site during the 5th century. This abandonment is also confirmed by the presence of 3 burials, which were found in 1072 underneath the medieval structures. As it is not possible to study the remains since they have disappeared, these burial sites must be dated to between the 5th century and 8th century. In other words, between the end of the Roman occupation and the construction of the first medieval fortifications in the 9th century. The archaeological site of a capella. Although the Torres de Oeste site was abandoned between the 5th and 9th centuries, there is a lesser known but extremely interesting site in Catoira that was occupied during this period. The site is essential to complete the knowledge of the transition between the ancient world and the Middle Age, not only in Catoira, but in the whole of northwestern Spain. At the site of San Salvador, at a distance of 2 kilometers to the south east of Torres de Oeste, an archaeological site was discovered in 1957, with an occupation that extends from the 1st century after death to the 13th century. At this site, known as a capella, 2 Roman inscriptions, remains of stone walls, and 4 sarcophagi were found, all of them found by chance or through removals carried out by the owners of the plot over time. Among the sarcophagi, there is a grave from the Swabian period and 2 later graves. One has a Latin cross with traces of white paint at the head, and a child's burial with a schematic representation of a male figure on the lid. As for the Roman epigraphs, one is a funerary inscription from the 4th century after death dedicated to a woman called Matidia, and the second is a votive inscription from the 1st century after death dedicated to the god Bandua, by the first Roman citizen documented in Catoira, Tiberius Claudius. All the findings allow us to interpret the site of a capella as a funerary space linked to a building of a religious nature, with well-found confirmation in a current toponymy a capella, in English, the chapel, and in a source from 1670, which mentions the existence in San Salvador of an old church. A coin from the time of the Visigothic king Buterico, beginning of the 7th century, on which the toponym Iglesia Vieja, Old Church, is mentioned for the first time, must also be related to the period of occupation supposed for a capella. It should not be forgotten that in the vicinity of a capella is the village of Aragunde, a toponym probably related to a personal name of Germanic origin, Aragundus Araguntus. The small archaeological intervention carried out during the year 2023 in a cappella confirmed the interest of this site, as graves were found in a primary position and a structure that could correspond to ancient chapel. No remains from the Roman period were documented in the area examined. The chronology of the 4 documented tombs, 1 excavated in the rock, 1 with stone slabs, and 2 in wooden box, suggests an occupation between the 9th century and the 13th centuries. This period coincides precisely with the construction of the first medieval fortifications in Torres do Este, and with this moment of greatest splendor. Middle Age. From the 9th century onwards, the invasions of the Northmen documented in written sources led to a new occupation of the site of Torres do Este, with the construction of defensive structures. This was gradually increased until they became a castle, the Castellum Honesti. The aim was to protect the entrance to Santiago from attacks by the English or the Normans or other barbarian peoples, as the Historia Compostelana, History of Compostela, points out. The fortress was reinforced by Archbishop Diego Gelmírez, who was worried about the Saracen attacks, who had already tried to destroy the castle in the west on 11,022. The first existing reference to the presence of a fortress in Torres de Oeste is an important epigraph found on the site at the end of the 19th century with words, Hoc signo tietur pius, hoc signo vincitur inimicus, that is to say, with this sign the God Christian defends himself. With the sign, he defends the Annamite. It probably belongs to the reign of Alfonso the Great in the 9th century and may have been placed at the entrance to the fortress. The message was clear. Divine help was requested to defeat the infidels. However, information from archaeological works suggests that the remains visible today correspond mainly to 13th century structures, when the fortress was at a peak. The fortress then had 2 distinct walled enclosures, an inner one flanked by 5 towers, of which only the remains of 4 are preserved, and which a central tower. These enclosures include various outbuildings and a chapel dedicated to Santiago. Outside this inner fortress, to the east, there was a large outer fortress, which was accessed through the Lugo Tower, which is mentioned in written source. This was the only access to the fortress. The River Ulla and the marshy area improved the defense of the fortress, which could only be accessed across a bridge that connects the islet with the mainland. The archaeological findings documented in the archaeological digs confirm that the remains visible today belong to the 13th century. The coins date from this period, as do the pottery remains. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the fortress had lost its defensive function. Its importance must have been linked to the control of commercial traffic to the interior of Galicia. This explains the presence of a large iron chain that crossed the width of the River Ulla at these points, and which is recalled by several sources from the period. In the 5th century, the fortress began to lose importance. Its end must be related to the Irmandiñas revolts, a popular uprising against the abuse committed by the feudal lords that caused great damage to the Galician fortress, including the Castellum Honesti, which would never regain its former splendor. After 1,700 years of history, we saw this place occupied during the Iron Age by a settlement dedicated to trade, a port in the Roman times, a necropolis in late antiquity, a fortress in the central centuries of the Middle Ages, and a center for the control of maritime traffic towards the interior of Galicia at the end of the Middle Ages. The old fortress was become a quarry. To conclude this conference, I think it is important, bearing in mind the reason that brings us together here today, to reflect on the absence of archaeological remains in Torres de Oeste related to the Northmen. It is curious that for the Iron Age and the Roman period, the greater sources are almost non-existent, except for the controversial problem created by the Turris Augusti. And we have archaeological data. However, when it comes to the Norman and Almoravid attacks between the 9th and 12th centuries, we have information from written sources. In the case of the Vikings, they mention attacks that took place from 844 to 1068, but we lack archaeological data. What is the reason for this? In my opinion, there are three possible theses. First, that the Viking attacks have not had the importance given to them in the written source, and that in many cases we are talking about rhetorical exaggerations provoked by the fear that their presence inflict on the local population. If their presence was less than seems to be inferred from the source, the evidence of their material culture will be correspondingly less, and so will be the chance of locating them. Second, the most of the objects carried by the Vikings were made of perishable materials, which would explain their absence in the record. As for the metallic materials, they could have been melted down for later use. That when studying the material culture from the Torres de Oeste, no evidence of Viking presence has been identified, as some researchers, for example Eduardo Morales Romero, have pointed out. In fact, the only object associated with Viking culture in Spain is the famous small box document in the Museum of San Isidoro de León. Third, as in other historical periods, if there was no occupation of the territory or fluid commercial exchange, the only evidence that can be documented of the presence of another civilizations come from the necropolis and burials, and above all, from the grave goods. Since no Viking occupations have been found to date in the territory of Galicia, and no burials have been found either, it is difficult to document evidence of their material culture. In any case, the very existence of a monumental fortress on the banks of the river Ulla is the best evidence of the desire to defend the inland entrance to Galicia during the medieval age. Foreign dangers, whether from the north, Vikings, or the south, Almoravids, were undoubtedly the cause of these constructions. So it is necessary to study in depth all the archaeological remains from the medieval period coming from the excavations carried out in Torres de Oeste, in order to verify the existence or non-existence of evidence that could be related to the Viking civilization. In the absence of such a study, I would like to end this conference by recalling some hopeful words, pronounced 2,000 years ago by the famous Roman poet Horatius in an epistle addressed to his friend Numicius. Quidquid subterra es, in apricum proferet aetas. All that the earth hides will come to light in the course of time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Diego, for your words and your acknowledgement. I introduce you, Manuel Gago, a prominent cultural journalist and esteemed professor at the University of Santiago de Compostela. With a keen eye for detail and a profound understanding of our cultural heritage, Manuel has made significant contributions to the field of journalism and academia. Besides, he has captivated audience through social media channels, sparking meaningful discussions and promoting a deeper appreciation for our shared past. Through his writing and teaching, Manuel continues to inspire us curiosity and to document for all people the importance of preserving and understanding our rich cultural legacy. Thank you, Manuel, and welcome to this seminar.
Well, I have a presentation to show, so when he was loading, let me thanks at the beginning of the Council of Katoira for inviting me to this meeting. I think it's very interesting making links, making connections, and partially my presentation is going to talk about linking and connecting through the space and also through time. I'm going to speak not about facts, but about stories. My aim is explain a vast range of stories on Vikings in Galician culture from 1,000 years period, from maybe the 10th century up to date. So we have a 1,000 years journey in only half an hour. I will try to do my best and do something interesting. So this is the place we start, and this is a very significant place, probably one of the most stunning and dramatic sites in Atlantic Europe to understand the struggling of the sea piracy. Not only Vikings, but also Muslims, pirates, and how they hit the coasts of many of the Atlantic and Mediterranean Europe. But here for us, Katoira is also a place of memory, a new place of memory, not very old, but very significant. And I always make a point. I always ask me something. Always I see this great pictures of barbarians coming, landing and shouting and preparing to drink a lot of Galician wine. Where are the defenders here? Because they are attacking a castle. They are attacking a castle, but there are any defender. So this is quite interesting because in many of the reenactment festivals, many of the reenactment in Europe is based in 19th century history. So it's a history of epic confrontation, war, battles, victories. In Galicia we have some kind of victories over the Vikings. So where are they? This presentation is going to think about that. Why they are not defenders? I think I have the solution. I don't know if it will be the explanation of the local community of Katoira about that, but I think it can match. We can find an explanation for that if we travel all around 1,000 years. So I'm going to stop in 4 different periods. One of them of formation of stories, of formation of tales, the Middle Age, and for us also very important, the modern age. So 600 years, 700 years after the facts happened, but they are very important for us. And 2 periods more modern, the 19th century and the contemporary world of rewriting of these stories. So in the past, in the Middle Age and Modern Age, stories were created, and now we dance around that. We rewrite, we rethink, and we add something. So when I, as a journalist, and have to explain all this period, and when historians work with this period, we have a lot of different sources. From all kind of royal stuff, chronicles and so on, a lot of church stuff also, and foreign texts from abroad, from the south and the north. A very important administrative documentation like contracts, legal, and so on, which has a lot of information there. The legends and the lore, the oral tradition of the places, and of course archaeology. But the most important, this is a lot of information from a lot of places, different places. But for understanding this story, we have to see that we never was all this information available at the same time. So if we make a view on the past, try to understand which kind of sources of information on Vikings have the people from centuries ago, we can see that they didn't see the same thing like us in the past, because their sources were more limited. And the primary sources, the older ones, the most authoritative sources are very important. So at the beginning, as you know, of course, there are the royal chronicles, Albedense, Rotense, and so on, the chronicles. All the ecclesiastical texts related to the facts, but also related to the lives of the saints, which is very important here also. And then in the modern age, some kind of very interesting aristocratic stories begin to be written around Vikings. And then with the 19th century and the beginning of the modern science of history, a lot of new documents began to be explored also. So all kind of administrative documentation, legal docs, royal diplomacy, and so on. And in the first time, the texts from abroad, which are very important. The voice of other participants in the story. And of course, in the last time, the connections with academics from other parts of Europe, which is very important to rethink many of the Middle Age in Galicia and the early Middle Age, and the new science of archaeology, which is now a revolution. The last remains of oral tradition, which are opening also a very interesting materials, and also, of course, art history. So if we pay attention to that, we see that each of these sources, each of these kinds of documents are offering a different point of view, a different story, from a different interest. And the interest of each of one of these, the interests of the kings, the interest of the bishops, the interest of the noblemen, the interest of the Vikings, the interest of the peasants and common people, and the interests of the Muslims are quite slightly different. So for many times, we don't have this diversity. We only have two versions, kings and bishops. And it was considered wrath. It was considered because they were the only sources. When you open the space, the panorama began to be more diverse and more interesting. So we're going to see some examples. For example, Royal Chronicles. Royal Chronicles, which is the oldest sources of all, are very important for understanding mobility, the period, the chronology of the Viking raids, the chronology of the attacks. And of course, in some cases, the war actions of resistance, the war actions of pursuing the Vikings. For example, this is the most famous, we have the Royal Chronica telling about the first apparition of Vikings. They landed in the Iberian Peninsula, and then were defeated in Farum Precantium, which is the famous Tower of Hercules, one of the oldest monuments still standing in Europe, which is nowadays Coruña, and you can visit if you can, and it's very interesting to visit. This is one of the oldest depictions of the monument. This is one of the oldest monuments in Europe still standing. So we know that the King Ramiro defeated the first Viking army and burned a lot of ships in Farum Precantium, in the Tower of Hercules. And then the Vikings continued to Lisbon. And we know it must be true because we have Muslim chronicles telling about this attack, this raid, and years much. Ecclesiastical chronicles. We use the ecclesiastical chronicles to many things. One of them, it let us, they give us a panorama of destruction, of chaos, of danger, of problems, especially destroying churches and destroying monasteries. And this is there is quite information in the church services, in the Christian churches, all around this kind of massive destructions of monasteries. But they are very scarce on the damage in civil population. So we only have one small piece of text in one of the medieval ecclesiastical chronicles around what happened with people in Viking time, when Vikings attacked. What happened with them? We have a very valuable text, but the most situational and the key of all of this is that the tale of the church stories are passivity and victimism. So Vikings destroyed. And Vikings destroyed, and we are going to find these tales of destruction even in very later sources, in sources from modern age. Some of the churches or monasteries were, according to these sources, were destroyed by Vikings, but the first reference is 300 or 400 years before, or even more. So, for example, in Britain, there are some authors that are questioning if is this kind of intentional tale. Were destroyed, not destroyed, what was destroyed used for the church? Because the church used Vikings to make a lot of things in these tales. The first of one is to use Vikings as punishment and argument of providentialism. For example, the famous death in battle of the Regius Bishop Cisnandus II, which was near from here in some place. There are a lot of discussion on where the battle was. The forces of Santiago, the forces of the Bishop of Santiago, fought against the Vikings, and the bishop was wounded by a lot of arrows and died. But this bishop was a bishop with a very bad image because he was enemy of Rosendo, one of the great figures of the medieval Galicia, and the bishop Gelmírez, who was the bishop who commissioned the chronicle, doesn't like a lot Cisnando. So we can figure there is some kind of punishment here. And even in later texts, in the 15th century, we have this kind of so famous God's punishment, Vikings as a punishment for your sins. So we can find in a very later chronicle explanation from a monk from Iria Flavia, from the bishop, telling that the Vikings came and destroyed and raped because some people accused to the Bishop Ataulfus for sodomy. So when you check the story, you realize there is a lot of many things around. And there is another very important thing. So you can see the Cresconius bishop here, very important, because the ecclesiastical sources present the bishops as the leaders. So from in front of the Viking enemy, the bishops became leaders, spiritual leaders, economical leaders, political leaders, and war leaders. And this is very interesting because we have a lot of saints of 10th century in Galicia, which are bishops, and all of that saints were also government guys, were also political leaders. So sources and ecclesiastical sources are very interested in presenting builders, warriors, defenders, people very strong. And we know that in some cases, probably not be this way. For example, in San Rosendo is very famous because in the Chronicles it says that he and the bishop, he and the Count Gonzalo command an army and defeated the king of Vikings. And this was very important for the identity of Rosendo. It was not so spiritual, but it was a ruler, in fact. A ruler under the king, but a ruler very important. And if you visit the Abbey of Celanova, you can see here the sword. You can see, this is the coat of arms of Cisnando, and here is the sword, remembering the defeat of the Vikings 600 years after. But according to the authors who work with the texts of the story of Rosendo, that's the story. It was posterior. It was not real. So there is an interest in charting, in beginning leaders, in building leaders. And building Galicia is ruled by bishops. Another sources show us open questions for us. For example, a very interesting and very unknown source from the 19th century, from a Muslim ambassador to the king of Vikings. He wrote a so beautiful chronicle of the travel from the Al-Andalus, from the Hispania, Muslim Hispania, to the land of the Vikings. He was living with the king of Vikings and dealing with them. And when he came back, he bring in the 19th century a letter for the ruler of Santiago de Compostela. So in the middle of the darkest and hard times of Viking attacks, Muslim sources, not Christian, spoke about diplomacy. So if we look sagas had a lot of information of Galicia. And sagas has also this kind of information. Adventures, building of Viking heroes, but they give us also very interesting data. For example, the establishment of winter markets between Viking people and population. This kind of pact, so we can have space to trade and share. So you don't find that in the royal or ecclesiastical sources. We don't know if it's true or not. But we don't find this kind of information in the other side. And another interesting thing is and we don't know for other parts of Europe, the Vikings as mercenaries, or in the middle of the Galician political struggling. So we can have some documents telling about this kind of struggles, and in some cases also a kind of alliance with local common people against the landlord. And you don't going to find this kind in the official sources, or in the official medieval sources. Legal documents, I really love that because they show things of common peoples and suffering that we cannot find in the official ecclesiastical and royal sources, because in that legal documents controlled by church, and they are preserved in the tombs, in the codex of the monasteries, so they are partially controlled also. We can find the kidnapping, we can find the murdering, we can have briberies, and also even land issues. For example, one of the most beautiful cases is one document from the, I think it's from the 11th century. Yes, 11th century, telling about a transaction, commercial transaction, telling at a land transaction. So they are marking where the land is, and they use symbolic reference in the landscape. So from this tree to that stone, from that stone, and one of the marcos, we say in Galego, marcos, landmarks. One of the marcos is the former or the old town of Lordomani. So a kind of winter camp, Viking winter camp, which is very close to here. We are here, and the place where Civitas Lordomani, with the town of Lordomanis, were very close from here, but it was not found until now. But we know that the 1 century after the attacks, people remembered where that place was. Advancing in time, so modern age. I really love this story because it's a kind of story of the modern age. In the modern age, aristocracy tried to find a mythical and epical past for their families. They tried to being part of the ancient kings, even ancient mythological figures, gods, and so on. So they invent a lot of stories, very, very, very funny stories on the past. They came from Troy. So their ancestors came from Troy and sailed unto Galicia, and then they established and bring the wine with them. So this kind of incredible stories, that stories formed by a lot of classical sources. So in the modern age, they began to use also Viking stuff for that. And we have a very nice story here, just in the center of the country, in a very strategic place, which is Castro Candaz, and they invented here something around this extraordinary site. This is a kind of archaeological site, probably medieval, maybe older, which is in the middle of a water reservoir. So you can see that only when the level of water falls, the ancient site emerges. So it's quite dramatic if you see it. It's very stunning to see. So families, local families, noblemen families from the area, consider that they came from here, from this site, from Castro Candaz. And they consider they came from here because it was founded by a Roman general who married with a Galician princess in the past, and then because in this place, Vikings were stopped. So Vikings, using the old ways, came here in order to attack all the realm. And when he came to Castro Candaz, in the deep of the river Minho, they were stopped by twin brothers, two twin brothers. So the twin brothers and all the warriors of that land, like in the Lord of the Rings, they fight and they defend the plains until the king arrived and defeated the Vikings. So it's a kind of use of Vikings, of memory of the family. And it's probably most of that must be invented. But it's very interesting. We don't know if there is any kind of memory behind. Probably not. In the modern age, something quite interesting happened also, which is very famous. This is the Cathedral of San Martino de Mondoñedo, considered the older cathedral in the whole Spain. It's in the north of Galicia, very close to the coast. And this is the tomb of San Gonzalo. San Gonzalo is this kind of unofficial saint, very usual in Ireland or in French Brittany or so on. The only people who consider San Gonzalo saint is the people of this place, not the Vatican. So we have quite clear evidence that San Gonzalo was this guy, Gonzalo Froilaz, which was part of one of the most important noble families from Galicia in the 12th century, the Traba family. And this is the chronology. It's very late, and it's very interesting for that. San Gonzalo is probably the most elaborated story in Galicia around the Vikings. So the story was happening here. An army of 100 Viking ships arrived to the north. And San Gonzalo, which was very older, bent his knee and began to pray. Two young guys helped holding their arms, began to pray. An incredible storm came. All the Viking ships were destroyed. Less one came back to his country to tell it. This is the chapel where all happened. There is another marks of topography of this story all around Foz, the county of Foz. But what interesting thing, this is a kind of example of reframing facts, because the most important of the Vikings, because we know that probably the Normans of the legend, we don't know what was the real fact, but probably the Normans of the legends was not the Vikings, was the real Normans. Because Gonzalo was a prominent guy just after the Hastings battle and the conquest of Britain by the Normans. And we have some documentary sources on conspirations and political conspirations all around the Normans, the expansive power of the Normans in the Atlantic, and the relations of the Kingdom of Galicia with them. So we don't know exactly, and even in the last years, the báculo of Cisnando, the báculo of San Gonzalo, which is really nice, was discovered, it was made in the north of France, or even in England, in a workshop of England at this time. So there is all a frame, all a story, which was reframed to fit with the old Vikings, violent Vikings. Just one thing more, up to coming to the end of the presentation, oral tradition. Oral tradition is very scarce, and it's very confusing, because Galicia was attacked by piracy from a lot of centuries, and of course after Vikings. So when you collect oral tradition, legends on attacks, you really don't know who you are telling them. There are people from the sea, Moros, which is a typical figure here, but we are not sure of who are telling. What we know is what they figure in the oral tradition, what the oral tradition tells. And the oral tradition tells something fascinating in some cases. And this is just one example of trauma, of preserved trauma. This is the beach of Fontesusiños, which is in Carnota, a very fortified place in the early Middle Ages and very close to Santiago. And you can see here a lot of rocks, granite rocks. So here in the beach, there is a spring. And in the spring, he lived a fairy lady. And when the pirates came, the tradition in Carnota is when the pirates came, the girls go into the fairy lady and asked them to turn them in rocks. So they were so afraid of coming pirates. So if you visit there, the landscape is landscape of women becoming rock to protect themselves from the attacks from the sea, which is a kind of impressive trauma. But the problem we have with oral tradition is just we are in the end of that time. There was this kind of legends existed, probably in a very massive way, and disappeared. It was not collected. So we are taking some peaks up there, around that, but we don't know exactly how much of this information. And to end, when the 19th century and the modern idea of history began, the Galician historians had also all of these kinds. They moved also with ecclesiastical tradition and partially royal chronicles. So they have only this point of view. In fact, this is the only depiction in all the history of Galician art representing fight. No, there is no any fight. This is not, and it's very early, it is from 1864. No more. You are going to see a lot of illustrations of Vikings, but not of fighting up to 1 decade, 2 decades ago. In fact, it's because Vikings were not playing an important role in the Galician history at the beginning. This is Manuel Murguía, which is the great historian from the 19th century. And this was a very influential man. He wrote a very important story. In fact, he defined the way, still today, we see the past of Galicia. And he developed the idea of the Celtic connections. He was interested in that for many times. Celtics were fashionable in the 19th century. Ireland was in a struggle with Britain, and he was interested in finding the connection with that struggle with Spain. A lot of things. But the most important thing for that is that the Celtic connection was a sea connection. So, from the 19th century, many of the modern Galician identity was created through the idea of sea interchange, sea mobility, sea movement. So we define today as an Atlantic culture. We define all around the sea. And this was very important, the connectivity as identity, because it helps us understand how the Vikings came to the modern Galician identity. This guy was Plácido Castro, and probably was one of the most internationalist intellectuals of Galicia. He was, for example, the responsible of Galicia be recognized as nation in the Society of Nations, in the pre-war Society of Nations. And he was a very British guy. He studied with the King of England in Scotland. He was a quite impressive guy. And he knows a lot of languages. Plácido Castro, in the 50s, in the 1950s, know all that happened everywhere. That was the time of union. European Union was constituted in 1958, and Plácido began to thinking how to implement a change. Plácido was able to read the Norse sagas. So, in fact, we have another point of view. Not only the Christian ones, but also more stories. Stories from very far away who spoke about Galicia. And this is a key thing, because everything changed. Plácido Castro was just in the right center of the invention and creation of the Viking feast of Katoira in the beginning of the 60s. He was also able and because he knows sagas, he began to give a name to the Vikings. Because the Galician Chronicles doesn't give any name to the Vikings, just Vikings, Lord Domani. They have not individual personality. So they decide to represent a wolf, the Viking, who was mentioned in the sagas, in the Norse sagas, and even he was able to create this crazy Viking song in Nordic languages, which is really great, to the local people of Katoira, sung in Swedish, I think, with some kind of quotations here for the howling of a wolf. He was able to create this kind of infrastructure all around the Vikings. And Vikings had enormous success because it passed from the Celtic connection to a new Atlantic connection. And the relations with other cultures begin to be important. This is the queimada, which is a kind of water of fire from Galicia. So you can see a Viking drinking queimada. And also, this was the first Galician history in comic. It was very important to help to my generation, which was the first generation in democracy, to know the history of his country. And he was a famous book, Historia de Galicia, who framed our view of the past, this comic. And in the center of the comic, of course, medieval times were very important, the pilgrims of Santiago, the bishops, of course, nobles, and in the center, a Viking ship. So Vikings became to great important. And other people make theories. For example, this is the ethnographer Staffan Morling, who believed in that time to find connections between Drakars and Dornas. Nowadays, it's more discussed today, but it has an enormous success in the people, in the popular knowledge on the past. So all my grandparent, who was sailor in the sea, and all his friends, all suddenly discovered they came from Vikings, and we're completely sure of that. Completely sure of that. All of this was like fire. So, where are the Galicians? Where are the defenders in the Viking of Katoira? Well, now I think I have my theory. In fact, we are. Just we are. They are not defenders, but because we consider part of our identity. So you don't need to face them. You embrace them. And this is the strong thing. No? So next years are going to be fascinating. In the way we're able to connect all new stuff, rethink and replace, we're able to rewrite the stories. And we will be able to create for the new generations a new story of Vikings in Galicia. So, many thanks.